My name is Edward. I am 35 years old, and if you're reading this, if by some miracle these words have reached someone who can understand, I want you to know I'm not crazy. Not yet. What I've lived through, what I still carry, is a dark stain that has clung to my soul and refuses to leave. A shadow that dances at the periphery of my vision, even when daylight floods the room. My life began to unravel just over 6 months ago. The divorce came out of nowhere, a clean, surgical blow that left me floored, disoriented. Years of routine, of a life I thought was solid and unshakable, crumbled to dust, into a gray cloud that blinded me. I found myself alone, adrift, my bank account dwindling, and my dignity eroding day by day. Self-esteem? Well, that was non-existent. I went from a successful professional to a ghost, wandering through my own home, a wraith of the man I used to be. In that abyss of despair, the opportunity to be a night watchman for an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts came as the last buoy in a stormy sea. The hours were hellish, sleepless nights, my body aching from constant vigilance, my mind exhausted by the loneliness and silence that only the night shift provides. The salary was paltry, barely enough to survive, but I needed it. I needed anything to pull me out of that hole, to pay the bills, to make me feel minimally useful. I clung to it with tooth and nail, without questioning the demands. I just accepted my new personal hell.
With the little money I had left, I ended up in the cheapest place I could find, an old building in the suburbs that seemed frozen in time, petrified in its own decay. Each crack in the walls, each foggy window, each faded brick seemed to whisper stories of abandonment, of lives that fell apart inside. The hallways were dimly lit tunnels with fluorescent lamps that buzzed and flickered like dying eyes, threatening to go out at any moment, plunging everything into a darkness that seemed alive. The plumbing rumbled and groaned all night, a guttural sound like an ancient creature agonizing in the building's underground, reverberating in the walls and in my chest. And the smell, the smell, mildew, dust accumulated for decades, dampness, a thick layer of abandonment that infiltrated my nostrils and seemed to stick to your skin, an essence of decay and forgetting. My apartment, 264, was a cubicle, but it was mine. The rent, so negligible, should have already raised a red flag, a warning that my desperate mind chose to ignore. From the first day, a strange smell bothered me. It wasn't just mildew, it was something more, something penetrating, almost sweet, and at the same time acrid, like burnt dried herbs and old smoke, but with a metallic, almost rusty touch, like dried blood. I tried everything to disguise it. I scrubbed the walls with chemicals that promised miracles, opened the windows to the putrid suburban air, bought the most potent air fresheners. Nothing helped. The odor seemed ingrained in the walls, in the cement, in the furniture, in the very atmosphere of the place. It was as if the house had its own foul breath, a stench of something very, very old, something that lived, breathed, and fed there. It was suffocating. And then, her, the neighbor in 265. I saw her for the first time in the lobby the day I moved in. a small, stooped figure, but with a strangely erect posture for such an elderly woman, defying gravity and time. She wore dark clothes, almost always black, of a heavy, opaque fabric that seemed to absorb the dim light of the hallways, making her almost invisible in the gloom, a silhouette barely distinguishable from the wall. A shiver ran through me, just from seeing her. A cold sensation that didn't come from the environment. I never knew her real name. In the building, no one knew, or at least no one dared to utter it. Some called her Mrs. Albright, but most referred to her simply as the Lady in 265. It was a nickname loaded with a weight I didn't understand at the time, but that echoed in the hallways, a murmur of dread and respect, almost reverence, which intrigued and frightened me. I rarely saw her in daylight. When I did, it was always at night or on cloudy days, when the sky was laden with gray, as if sunlight bothered her, burned her ancient skin. She seemed to skulk through the shadows, a ghostly figure that moved with a almost transparent silhouette, disappearing around the curves of the hallways. And when I did encounter her, which was rare, she carried strange bags. They weren't ordinary grocery bags, the cloth or plastic kind. Inside, I glimpsed things that made my stomach knot, a wave of nausea and dread. Bones that looked like chicken, but with a dried up and too dark appearance, as if they had been charred or had gone through some process that left them like that. Small bottles with liquids ranging from brown to almost black, dense and opaque, without sparkle. Thick, also black candles that seemed handmade, with a strange, irregular, almost sticky wax. And most disturbing of all, small rag dolls, crude, with blurred features, tied with red strings, almost the color of dried blood. I always looked away, pretended I hadn't seen anything, that my eyes hadn't registered those disturbing images. I didn't want her to catch me observing her strange acquisitions. I didn't want to interact. I didn't want to be noticed. I wanted to be invisible to her.
The night watchman job forced me to stay up all night, sitting on a hard chair, my eyes fixed on monitors blurred by dust, my body chilled by the air conditioning that never seemed to work properly. During the day, I had come home exhausted, begging for rest, for sleep that would give me some respite from reality. But sleep wouldn't come. And it wasn't just because of the accumulated fatigue. No, it was because of her. Because of what came from the wall of apartment 265. Every single night, without fail, always, precisely at 3:17 in the morning, it was a macabre clockwork, a precision that terrified me more than any random noise. I would lie down, my body aching from vigilance, my mind exhausted, begging for sleep that would give me some relief from reality. But sleep wouldn't come, and it would begin. Scratches. At first, I thought it was a rat, an infestation in the building perhaps, but they weren't rodent scratches. They were subtle, rhythmic, almost delicate, but incisive, like long fingernails scraping wood or mortar intentionally with a malicious purpose. I pressed my ear to the wall and felt a cold vibration, almost a hum, that seemed to come from within the very structure of the building, from its deepest bowels, vibrating in my bones. Followed by murmurs. It wasn't English, nor Spanish. It was a strange guttural language, but whispered, a muffled sound, almost a death chant that echoed in my head, filling my most intimate thoughts. I tried to decipher it, but the words were indecipherable, a tangle of chilling sounds that mixed with the sound of my own blood pounding in my veins, a frenetic drumming. It seemed the old woman was reciting something, some kind of ancient forbidden prayer or enchantment, an invocation. Then came the knocks, almost inaudible at first, but always in the same pattern. 2 quick knocks, a pause, 1 long knock. Again and again, like a code, as if someone was tapping with their fingertips, or something similar, in a disturbingly familiar rhythm that I began to anticipate with dread, my heart racing even before they began. I tried to cover my ears with the pillow, turned the TV to max volume, put on headphones, but the sound seemed to penetrate the walls, the layers of insulation, and settle in my head. A cold, constant echo that resonated in my eardrums and in my soul. I felt each knock in my own flesh, in my own rib cage, as if my body were a drum for that macabre melody.
Sometimes I heard a heavy sound, as if something large and formless was being dragged across her apartment floor. Slow, dragging, a sound of friction that made me wonder what the hell she could be moving at that hour of the morning. Heavy furniture? A crate? But the sound was different, organic somehow, as if something wasn't just being dragged, but pulled, resisting with all its might, groaning and struggling. And other times, the worst of all, I swore I heard crying. Muffled, yes, but unmistakable. Crying that came from inside the wall, as if someone was trapped there, agonizing in a silent, deep pain. Sometimes it was a low, hoarse lament, like that of a tortured adult. Other times a thin, childlike wail that chilled my soul and made me sick to my stomach, with a knot in my gut. I would sit on the bed, in the dark, my heart pounding, my forehead sweating, trying to understand what was happening in that neighboring apartment, what kind of horror I had gotten myself into. My imagination always went to the worst scenarios, the most vile, the most cruel. I felt powerless, just a forced listener to a tragedy unfolding next door. Insomnia became my shadow. I spent my days at home, my eyes burning, my head throbbing with a constant pain, unable to catch more than a few fragmented hours of sleep, broken by jolts. At work, I could barely concentrate, my reflexes slow, my irritation growing to unbearable levels, almost exploding at any moment. My colleagues started to find my erratic behavior strange, my deep, dark circles, my explosive temper. I was turning into a ghost even before night fell, an empty shell of the man I used to be. My body constantly ached, my stomach churned with nausea. Anxiety was a constant knot in my throat, slowly suffocating me, stealing my breath.
Curiosity, or perhaps desperation for an uninterrupted night's sleep, for a single moment of peace, made me take a risk. One day, in the shared laundry room of the building, I saw Mrs. Jenkins,
an elderly lady who had lived there for decades, with white hair and skin wrinkled by life. With the most casual voice I could force, while pretending to fold some socks that weren't even mine, I asked about the neighbor in 265. Mrs. Jenkins stiffened. She looked at me with an expression of dread in her eyes, a genuine terror, as if I had just conjured the devil by speaking the old woman's name. The iron she was holding fell with a dull thud to the floor, and she didn't even bother to pick it up, as if it were insignificant compared to what I had just asked. "Don't knock on her door, son. Don't look her in the eyes," she whispered, her voice almost fading, turning her head as if she feared the old woman herself could hear her from the kitchen, or that her walls might have ears. "Don't mess with what's quiet. There's something there. Ancient something. Something we don't understand. And it's better not to understand, believe me." I tried to insist, but she turned abruptly, her hands trembling, her body shrinking with fear, and hurried away, almost running, leaving me alone with the smell of laundry detergent and her fear. Her fear was palpable, a cold cloud that enveloped me and that frightened me much more than the noises. That silent dread from Mrs. Jenkins was a much more terrifying warning than any sound I could hear.
Another day, I ran into the building superintendent, Mr. Johnson, an old man of few words with skin weathered by the sun and years of work, who seemed to have seen everything. He knew the building like the back of his hand, every crack, every leak. I asked about the noises from apartment 265. He was cleaning some tools but stopped abruptly, letting a wrench fall to the floor with a metallic clang. His face grew serious, his mouth tightened into a thin, tense line. He looked around, as if expecting to be overheard, as if his own shadow could betray him. "The last person who complained about apartment 265, he began, his voice low, almost a conspiratorial murmur, the tone of someone telling a forbidden secret, vanished. Simply vanished, out of nowhere, without telling anyone, disappeared bag and baggage, left, at least that's what they say, but no one ever saw the guy's face again, not even his furniture. Just evaporated, without a trace, as if he had never existed. The police came, asked questions, but found nothing, as if the ground had swallowed him. He looked me in the eyes. The intensity of that gaze made me recoil. There was a warning there, crystal clear, a deep fear he couldn't hide. She's not just a weird old lady, you understand. There's something there, something you won't want to know. There's something that stays, something that clings." He said nothing more, just went back to cleaning his tools with an unsettling silence, leaving my questions hanging in the dense air of the basement, a heavy burden upon me. That haunted me more than the noises. Vanished? Out of nowhere? How was that possible? Who just disappeared without a trace? The idea planted a seed of paranoia in my already exhausted mind. I started observing more, distrusting every shadow that danced on the wall, every creak of the floor upstairs, every whisper of the wind that came through the window. Every day I felt more trapped in that apartment, as if the walls were closing in around me, suffocating me, slowly crushing me. Months dragged on. turning me into a shell of my former self. My insomnia was chronic, an endless torture. My mind a blur, unable to distinguish reality from imagination. At work, I could barely stay awake, making simple mistakes, responding rudely to any question. I was almost fired. Despair mixed with anger, and anger over the weeks became a poison boiling in my veins, gnawing at me from within. I was exhausted, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. My nerves frayed, every sound making me jump. I started having quick visions, flashes of things that weren't there, but seemed as real as my own hands. A shadow quickly passing through my field of vision, a blur in the hallway that disappeared when I looked directly. The smell of apartment 264, that mix of mildew and herbs, seemed to intensify with every breath, suffocating me. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air was thinning, as if something was stealing my oxygen. My head ached, not just from fatigue, but as if something was squeezing my skull from within, trying to crack it in half. I was on the brink of an abyss, ready to fall at any moment, to surrender to the madness that lurked. Until one gray, rainy afternoon, after another sleepless night, I lost control. The irritation, the accumulated fatigue, the feeling of being slowly tortured, deprived of sleep, of peace, of sanity. It was too much. I knew I was at my breaking point. I felt madness lurking in the corners of my mind, ready to swallow me whole. Rage was an uncontrollable fire. I walked to door 265, my heart pounding hard in my chest, a furious drum, adrenaline rushing through my veins. My hand clenched into a fist, and I knocked hard. 1, 2, 3 times. The sound echoed in the gloomy hallway, a scream of fury and desperation, an explosion of all the accumulated frustration. "Open this door!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, choked with anger and lost sleep, almost a growl. "I know what you're doing. Stop this witchcraft. You're trying to drive me insane. I know it's you." The door slowly opened. The creak was a lament in the hallway, dragging through the air, announcing the horror.
She was there, small, stooped, but with an incredibly erect, almost rigid posture. Her eyes, dark and deep as bottomless wells, watched me unblinking. No trace of surprise, anger, fear, or any human emotion. Just a disturbing stillness, almost supernatural. It seemed she could see through me, through each of my deepest fears, through my exhausted soul, peering into my essence. I felt a chill down my spine that ran from head to toe, as if the air around her was ice, dense and paralyzing. Then she smiled, a slow smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that chilled my blood, that made me doubt my own sanity, my very existence. It was the smile of someone who knows something you will never understand. A triumphant smile. A predatory, hungry smile that promised more than just my ruin. Her smile, That smile wasn't human. It held no malice, anger, or even triumph in the way I knew it. It was something more primal, more ancient. The smile of one who watches a trap close, of one who already knows the end. And as the door to 265 slowly closed with a creak that dragged through my bones, I knew there was no turning back, that I had knocked on the door of my own hell. The days that followed that confrontation were a blur of escalating terror and physical degradation. Insomnia, once a torture, transformed into my only companion. I could no longer sleep, not even for an hour. Every time my eyes closed, the darkness became a screen for distorted visions, vivid nightmares that pulled me back into wakefulness, sweating and gasping. I saw her eyes, empty and deep, staring at me from the ceiling, from the corners of the room. I smelled the scent, that smell of burnt herbs, mold, and something metallic was now constant, suffocating, ingrained in my nostrils, on my palate. It was as if I were breathing the putrefaction of apartment 265, inhaling the air she exhaled.
The deterioration began subtly, almost imperceptibly. First, it was my skin. It became pale, with a grayish, dull tone, as if life were being drained from me. Veins bulged, blue and thin, beneath the almost transparent epidermis. Deep purple dark circles settled under my eyes, a permanent shadow that gave me a cadaverous appearance. I tried to look at myself in the mirror, but the image I saw reflected back was that of a stranger, a ghost who could barely stand. Then came my mouth. My gums began to swell, to become sensitive, painful. A metallic, bitter taste lingered on my tongue, as if I were chewing old coins. One morning, while brushing my teeth, something hard and sharp gave way. I felt a slight snap, and the pain was acute, like an exposed nerve. I looked at the brush, and there it was, a piece of enamel, a small fragment of my tooth. My whole body trembled. That day, it wasn't just a piece. It was an entire tooth, loose, wobbly, until with minimal effort, it detached. It fell into my hand, white and cold, its root stained a dark red. Panic hit me like lightning. A tooth! My God, my teeth were falling out! In the following days, the scene repeated itself. More teeth, small, fragile, as if they were disintegrating. I kept them, a macabre collection, in a small jar, observing them with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. Each loss was a blow, irrefutable proof that something was terribly wrong, something that defied all logic. My mouth became a pit of pain and open sores, my tongue bleeding with every movement. I could barely eat. Food felt like sand, the flavors distorted by the putrefaction I felt coming from within me. Hair loss was more gradual, but no less frightening. My pillow was always covered in strands, my shower clogged with every wash. When I ran my hand through my hair,
Entire clumps came out, thin and dull. In a few weeks, my once thick hair began to thin, to show bald spots that I tried to hide, but which became increasingly evident. My body seemed to be falling apart, disintegrating from the inside out. I was a decomposing body, still breathing.
My mental health, that was already in tatters. Paranoia consumed me. I started to feel watched all the time. Every creak in the building, every whisper of the wind, every step in the hallway was a warning. I checked the lock on my apartment door multiple times a night, like a useless ritual. I slept with a kitchen knife under my pillow, a false comfort against an enemy I couldn't see, couldn't touch, but knew was there, breathing next to me. Hallucinations intensified. I saw blurs dancing at the periphery of my vision, shadows that writhed on the walls, distorted faces that flickered in the foggy windows. The apartment seemed to breathe with me, the smell intensifying, the air thinning with every uneven beat of my heart. I heard voices, unintelligible whispers that seemed to come from all directions, calling me, mocking me, promising me pain. My mind was a labyrinth of horrors, and I was trapped in it, wandering aimlessly, losing track of time, of reality. I knew I needed help. The last flicker of reason propelled me. With my body trembling, my skin cold and clammy, my teeth aching, my hair thinning, and my mind on the verge of collapse, I dragged myself to a hospital. I told an exhausted doctor my fragmented story, desperation and fear overflowing in every word. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and skepticism, the look of someone who had seen many cases of stress and sleep deprivation.
Days of tests followed. Dozens of blood tubes, MRIs, CT scans, neurological exams. I felt my body screaming, begging for help, but the machines, cold and indifferent, registered nothing. The results came back, one after another, each a slap to my already faltering hope. "You are perfectly healthy, Mr. Edward." The doctor's words echoed in the office, cold and empty. He held the clipboard with a professional air, but his eyes conveyed veiled impatience. "Your blood tests are normal. Your hormone levels are in order. There are no signs of infection, vitamin deficiency, or any condition that would justify hair loss or tooth loss. Your neurological exams do not indicate any brain abnormality that could cause the hallucinations you describe. Your blood pressure and heart rate are regular." He paused, and I could see the conclusion forming in his mind. "Everything indicates a severe case of stress and chronic sleep deprivation, which can lead to psychosomatic symptoms and, in extreme cases, temporary psychotic disorders. I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist. It's the best I can do for you, Edward."
He handed me a prescription for anxiolytics and a referral to a mental health specialist. I held the papers, feeling the weight of each word. Perfectly healthy? My mind screamed in protest. My body was falling apart, my teeth falling out, and he told me I was perfectly fine, that it was all in my head. Disbelief and anger mingled with an even deeper terror. If medicine found nothing, what was this? What kind of invisible force was gnawing at me from within? I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't. It was real. It was her. That old witch.
I returned to apartment 264, dragging myself, an empty shell. With each step, I felt the air grow heavier, the smell stronger, the darkness denser. The doctor's words were a cruel echo in my mind. No abnormality, nothing. This could only mean one thing. Whatever was doing this to me, it wasn't something science could see, touch, or measure. It was something beyond human comprehension, something supernatural, and it was personal. I started to see Mrs. Albright differently, no longer as a simple strange neighbor, but as a predator. Her empty eyes, her emotionless smile, her bags full of macabre objects, everything fit into a terrifying figure, an entity that fed on my agony, on my degradation. She didn't want to kill me. Not yet. She wanted to break me. She wanted to see me crumble, piece by piece, until nothing was left. I felt trapped in an invisible web. Every tooth that fell out, every strand of hair that came loose, every minute of lost sleep was evidence that I was being consumed, but not in a physical, tangible way. It was an erosion of the soul, a slow dissolution of my existence. She was stealing from me, stealing my health, my sanity, my very life, and the doctors, with all their science, were blind, useless. The idea of fleeing crossed my mind, but where would I go? Where do you run from a threat that roots itself in your own skin, in your own bones? And money, I barely had enough for the rent of that coffin. My job, hanging by a thread, was the only thing that kept me minimally connected to reality.
I was alone, completely alone. The world outside couldn't see me, couldn't hear me, couldn't help me. I was the only witness to my own end, and she, Mrs. Albright, was watching. I could feel her, even through the walls, even in the deadly silence of my apartment. I felt her gaze, cold and hungry, upon me. One night, as I writhed in bed, the sheets wet with sweat, my mouth bleeding, I felt an intense itch on the palm of my right hand. I scratched, and the itch intensified. A small red spot appeared, and then I felt it, something moving under my skin. Tiny specks, as if minuscule needles were piercing my tissue. In a panic, I rubbed my hand against the mattress, trying to alleviate the sensation, but it only worsened. I looked at my palm and saw tiny black dots, almost imperceptible, were moving beneath my skin.
They were minuscule, minuscule dots, as if something was crawling, nesting there. I screamed, a muffled scream of pure terror. I tried to claw them out with my fingernails, but they seemed to burrow even deeper. Those dots, they were inside me. The bathroom mirror was my tormentor. My face was distorted, my gaze glazed over, lifeless, my skin grayish and flaky, my eyes deep-set and reddish, grotesque bald spots where hair once was. My mouth was the worst, a dark abyss with few loose teeth, some completely missing. I constantly tasted the metallic tang of dried blood on my tongue. My body was no longer mine. It was a vessel for something that was consuming it from within.
The visions became more constant, more real. I saw shadows moving at the corner of my eye, blurs that formed and disappeared in a blink. The apartment walls seemed to undulate, to breathe, as if the building were alive and watching. The air was heavy, dense, and I felt a constant pressure in my chest, as if something was slowly crushing me. And then came the insects. Small black creatures, minuscule, almost invisible, crawling on the walls, on the floor, on my skin. I saw them at the periphery of my vision, but when I tried to focus, they disappeared. They started appearing on my sheets, on my clothes. I felt them under my skin. The small spots that appeared on my hand were now all over my body, crawling, itching. I scratched until I bled, until I hurt, but the sensation wouldn't go away. It was as if my flesh was infested, as if I were a nest for those things. Her voice, Mrs. Albright. I heard it. Not just the muffled murmurs of the early morning, but now her voice came directly to me, whispering in my ear. An ancient, guttural language which somehow I began to understand. They were words of curse, of possession, of an ancient ritual she was completing. She told me I was hers, that I was the perfect vessel, that my suffering fed her. I stopped leaving the apartment, except to go to work, where exhaustion prevented me from thinking clearly. But even there, I wasn't safe. The smell of burnt herbs followed me. Shadows danced on the monitors. Whispers haunted me. I saw Mrs. Albright in every dark corner of the warehouse, her predatory smile haunting me.
The night of my breaking point arrived with a storm. Torrential rain lashed against the windows. Thunder echoed, and the darkness was total, except for the intermittent flashes of lightning. I was lying on the floor of my bedroom, curled in a fetal position, trembling uncontrollably. The apartment's temperature had dropped drastically, a damp, biting cold that seemed to come from within the walls. I felt my bones freeze. The sounds from apartment 265 were deafening. They were no longer scratches or murmurs. It was a chorus, voices in an incomprehensible language, chanting in unison, a macabre lament that filled the air, and the crying of children, multiple cries in different tones, mingled with the sinister melody. I heard thuds, not the rhythmic thuds from before, but loud, dry thuds, as if something was being repeatedly struck against the floor. And then the wet sound, something being crushed, a viscous, disgusting disgusting sound that reverberated in my head. The smoke, this time it was denser, darker, and the smell was unbearable, sweet and foul, like burning, rotten flesh mixed with the metallic aroma and that of moldy herbs. I felt my stomach churn. I opened my apartment door, not to flee, but out of desperation, for air. The hallway was enveloped in a dark fog, illuminated only by the reddish glow seeping from beneath the door of 265. It was a visual and olfactory hell.
That's when I saw her, Mrs. Albright. She was standing in the hallway, in front of my door. I hadn't seen her leave. She was there, erect, defying gravity and time, despite her age. Her black, empty eyes were fixed on me, and she smiled, that same slow, predatory smile. But now there was something different. Her lips were stained a dark red, almost black, and a trickle of a viscous dark liquid ran from the corner of her mouth. She extended her hand to me. Her long, yellowish fingernails looked like claws. In the palm of her wrinkled hand, she held something. It was a small dollhouse, identical to the ones I had seen in her bags. But this one was different. It had a red string, yes, tied around its neck. But the most terrifying thing was what was in place of its eyes. Two small, empty, dark holes, and in place of its mouth, a dark, moist stain, as if something had been torn out. And on its chest, a small piece of flesh, faintly pulsating, still damp with blood. I recoiled, choking on the smell and the terror. My mind screamed for me to run, to scream, but my body was paralyzed. She took a step closer, and her voice, which was once a whisper, was now clear, resounding in my ears as if it were inside my own head. "You are mine, Edward," she said, her voice hoarse, almost a hiss. "Your body decays. Your mind fades. You are the perfect sacrifice, pure despair, pure agony. They feed." I didn't know who they were, but terror flooded me. She extended the doll to me, and I felt an icy coldness run through me. The doll's eyes, they were mine. The torn mouth, it was mine. I don't know what happened next. My memory is a blur of terror and pain. I remember a scream. Perhaps it was mine. I remember her hand extending, the smell of decay and the taste of blood in my mouth. I remember the sensation of being pulled, of being dragged into the darkness, into the hell I knew was in apartment 265. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was her smile, that victorious smile, and her eyes. They weren't just empty, they were hungry. They were hers. If you're reading this, if by some miracle these words have reached someone who can understand, I don't know where I am. I don't know if I'm still alive, if I'm real, if I'm just a shadow. But I know that horror exists. It's not a story, it's real, and it's here in apartment 265. And if you, by chance, hear knocking on your neighbor's wall at 3:17 in the morning, or smell a strange scent of burnt herbs, don't investigate, don't ask, don't knock on the door. Just run. Run while you still can, because once she finds you, once she smiles at you,
You will be next, and the terror will be more real than you could ever imagine. You will feel every tooth falling out, every piece of sanity unraveling, and she will watch you. This is the end of the tale, or the end of my story. If you felt drawn into this account, share this video to warn others about the dangers lurking in the shadows. Who knows? You might be saving someone from a fate worse than death. What would you do if your neighbor were a witch? Leave your comment below.